Well, a few weeks ago, Dave and I noticed a strange noise in our living room, apparently coming from the fireplace. You know, we had had a duck fall down our chimney flue before, and a little bird got stuck there once, and then there was a squirrel and the bat. But this was a beast of a different kind. Well, we were veterans, and I knew that when Dave put on his leather work gloves, his safety goggles, and his long-sleeve shirt on the hottest day of the year, that he was serious about setting this captive free. But when he reached up into the flue, he couldn't feel anything or anyone, and yet the din persisted. See if you can guess the source of this noise. That's not the half of it. It gets louder than that. Well, thanks to Paul Brubaker's birding expertise, we learned that we had a nest of chimney swifts in our flue. We learned also that if we were patient for about 4 weeks, the fledglings would be ready for their launching, seeing the light at the end of the flue and flying to freedom in the sky. Each time the parent birds came and went, the babies would raise a ruckus. Of course, these growing birds were hungry, and they let us know it. They got so loud, however, that we couldn't hear the TV when they got going. Yeah. And so, until this past Wednesday, we cohabited with these birds who reminded us frequently of their presence. And on Wednesday at about noon, just 4 days ago, we heard quite a kerfluffle and a great flapping of wings that was more intense than ever. And then, silence. We went outside to see if we could see anything coming out of the chimney, but they had literally already flown the coop. Needless to say, we now have a brand new cap on our chimney, which Dave and Jeff Muma installed using a lift 30 feet high, with me standing by to help. I don't know what help I was going to be if these guys fell 30 feet. But we do have the satisfaction of knowing that these birds made their way out, and they are safe and doing whatever it is that chimney swifts do. And any future generations will have to find another home, sweet home. We rejoiced, partly because housing this family of birds had been an inconvenience, and we were glad that they had moved on safely. But mostly we rejoiced because we found joy in being part of God's amazing creation. Who could have imagined baby birds hatched in the dark depths of a chimney flue some 30 feet below the beckoning bright blue sky, nourished by parent birds who came and went diligently for 4 weeks with wings fully equipped to propel them many times a day up and down that 30-foot flue that was only 12 inches square. We marveled. What a joy. Well, this is the second week in our 4-week summer series, Drop the Needle. This is the third summer, I think, that we have been using this series, and we've explored scriptures that might not have been chosen otherwise, just as a needle drops randomly on a record. And it's been an adventure. Last week, Pastor Naomi looked at a passage about prophets Isaiah 1 and 2, and what we can learn about God's character and why that's important to us. This morning, our passage is also from the Hebrew Scriptures. It is from Psalm 34, read by Pastor Jason as the call to worship, which is what would have been a common practice in Israelite worship. The particular verse that we landed for this morning is verse number 2. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Or as paraphrased in the Message, I live and breathe God. If things aren't going well, hear this and be happy. And so this morning we look at this text, given its context, to see what it holds for us. There are 15 individual hymns of thanksgiving that are found in the book of Psalms. This psalm is a song of thanksgiving, of great joy, in which the poet blesses God for God's help and grace, and invites the hearers to find joy regardless and in spite of their situations. The poem's form is that of a wise teacher's address to students, and it's spoken in the plural. addressing them, "O children." Reciting what God has done, this psalm tells of the nearness, the tenderness, the ready help, and the mighty power of God. And it invites the hearers to find joy in all of life, too. And I think there are two things about this psalm that are particularly intriguing and worth noting. First, there's a backstory here that would have enabled the people to understand the depth of joy that is being expressed. This psalm is attributed to the great King David in a moment that is surely not remembered as one of his more saintly. The reference is assumed to be a story found in 1 Samuel. David, on the run from Saul, had fled for refuge to King Achish of Gath. When one of the king's servants recognized him as a great warrior, David found himself in a precarious position. Fearing for his life, he concluded that his safety would best lie in pretending to be a madman, a part he apparently embraced wholeheartedly, even going so far as to scratch at walls, and he was said to have let spittle run down his beard to look even crazier. The king, wanting nothing to do with what appeared to be a raving lunatic, sent David on his way, saving his life. What the original audience would have understood is that this psalm was alleged to have been penned by David himself at one of the low points of his life, an unknown on the run trying to save his life. And when he was saved, David responded with unbridled, enthusiastic joy as expressed in this psalm. Secondly, there's another feature that helped the hearers of this psalm understand the depth of joy. This psalm is an alphabetic acrostic. Each verse begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Acrostic poems were the works of highly skilled literary artists and functioned in ancient Israelite literature in a number of ways. They were most likely memory devices to aid an individual and corporate recitation. For instance, if this psalm were an alphabetic acrostic in English, Jason might have recited all 22 verses from memory, and we would have recited them from memory with him. In addition, these psalms summoned all that could be said or needed to be said about a particular subject, summing it up literally from A to Z, Aleph to Tav, using the entire alphabet to encompass every potential word to praise God and to express joy. The call to joy is not limited to the psalmist. In the spirit of the round that we sang during the children's time this morning, these words of the Apostle Paul were penned to the church at Philippi. "Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving and joy, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." In this short passage, Paul sets before his beloved church at Philippi great aspirations in life, and the first, at the very top of the list, is joy. "Rejoice," says Paul, and I will say it again, rejoice. It was as if he said rejoice once, and then there flashed into his mind a picture of all that was to come. Paul himself was lying in a Roman prison cell with almost certain death awaiting him because of his faith. And the people at Philippi were setting out on a new path as followers of Jesus. Dark days and dangers and persecution inevitably lie ahead. This fledgling church was not only troubled by external threats and a hostile environment, but there was great internal strife. And it's as if Paul were saying, I've thought of everything that could possibly happen down the road, and I'm going to stick with it. Rejoice, and again I say, rejoice. Rejoice, always ongoing. The use of the present imperative twice signals that rejoicing is to be a habitual attitude that can actually inform behavior. By practicing, we can change. We can find joy. Paul urged the church not to be victimized by its problems from within or without. Something worth noting that Paul and his contemporaries would not have known, nor would have the psalmist or even King David, is that joy is really good for us. On a scientific level, we feel joy in our neurotransmitters, which are tiny chemical messenger cells that transmit signals between neurons and other cells. These neurotransmitters are responsible for processes and feelings in almost every aspect of the body, from blood flow to digestion. The benefits of feeling joy are that joy promotes a healthier lifestyle, it boosts the immune system, and it fights stress and pain and supports longevity. As a joyful folk, we live longer and we live better when we experience joy. And we feel joy in our bodies because of the release of dopamine and serotonin, two types of neurotransmitters in the brain. And that goes for King David, for the Apostle Paul, and for you, and for me. This is a joy that is deep down inside. This joy can also be translated to be well or to thrive. This joy doesn't deny the painful realities of life, but instead it affords the well-being and even thriving in the midst of them. This is the real and lasting joy that comes from the confidence that no matter what happens, we are inseparably connected to God and to one another. This joy is not a fleeting mood. It has a lasting effect, and it has the power to change our lives. Perhaps the most beautiful and purest joy that we continue to experience is the joy that emanates from our sisters and brothers in Nigeria. When visiting there on my 2017 Sabbath rest, I had the honor of an invitation to preach on a hot June Sunday morning at the Mubi No. 2 church. This church had been burnt to the ground by the insurgency by the Boko Haram in 2014. While a new church building was under construction, this large congregation of about 800 people gathered under a corrugated tin roof supported by timbers. Simple benches held the full to overflowing crowd. These folks had lost not only their church building, but most had lost their homes and their schools, and everyone had lost loved ones, either kidnapped or murdered. And yet, joy filled this place and lit the beautiful faces of those present. This past week, I asked Sister Rebecca Dali how the Nigerian people can continue to be full of joy, even when terrible things are happening all around. And here's what she said.
I would like to share why me and other Nigerians are happy, singing joyfully, even when terrible things are happening. We constantly pray and fast to hand over to God our problems. Once we have prayed, we believe that God is in control of our situation. To us, crisis, death, are not the end of life, but a process to the next better world in heaven. Due to short life expectancy, we focus more on going to heaven. We interpret events as fulfillment of Jesus' prediction of end life. Finally, during crisis period, we get support and counseling and encouragement from our families, from community, and so we share our burden together.
Sister Rebecca has lost much, including a son and other family members, and yet we know the joy that she exudes. She said, we get support from community, and so we share our burdens together. You know, this psalm gives us a model for living joyfully, whether it's marveling at God's incredible creation in the form of a chimney swift, or a second chance of life as King David, or reminding the church at Philippi that God is with them and they have one another when they need them most, just like our friends in Nigeria. Sometimes life is beautiful, and wonderful and filled with goodness and grace. And God is there giving blessing and celebrating with us and for us. And it's easy to feel joy. And sometimes life is hard, gritty, disappointing, filled with heartaches. We all know that. We've been there, and maybe we're still there. But God is there too, holding on to us, comforting us, blessing us with the promise to stay with us through the good and the bad, drawing us ever more deeply into that loving embrace and the promise that nothing, not even death, will separate us from the love of God. God understands, and God doesn't stand at a distance. In Jesus, God has joined to our story and is working, even now, even here. In Jesus, we may not just endure, but flourish, experiencing joy in our daily lives and sharing that joy with each person that we meet. May it be so.